Hi, fifth grade. I am going to be guiding you through a final check of your project for Mixed Up Files, where you are writing a story. The first thing that we are going to do as you wrap up your project is make sure that we review the requirements, go through and see how it's being graded, and then finally look through the story itself to make sure that it's done and that it makes sense and that everything's the way you want it. These are important things to do because sometimes as you write a story, you get caught up in it and your mind gets used to all the different elements and you forget to kind of look at the details and the specifics and make sure that it's being done the way that it's supposed to be done. I don't want you to just have been working on it for a while, be used to it, just kind of turn in as is. I want you to check through one more time and use these things to help make sure it's your best work. So, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the assignment paper. This is where you got the original assignment, the prompt, and you're going to make sure that you have kind of covered your bases with this. So let's go through together. If you don't have this right now, you can pull it up in your Google Docs or just listen as I read through it with you. But this is shared with you, so if you need to go back to it, you can go to your Google Docs and search up mixed up writing or mixed up assignment. So, write a short story of at least 1,500 words with an engaging plot, proper structure, and detailed characters. At least 1,500, so 1,500 words, means you can have more than that, but you can't have less. Why did I do that? I need you to write a substantial story. I don't just want a couple paragraphs from you. If you go into your Google Doc, you can check on the word count of that document up at the top. I will pull up an example real quick. I won't show one of yours on the screen or anything. I'll just make sure that I can tell you exactly where to click for that. So, you were given 3 different options for your story. It should be one of these 3 things. Extend the book by writing either the next chapter, so a chapter 11, or an epilogue, which is sort of like a wrapping up, where are they now kind of thing to finish up the story. You can do the first chapter to a sequel, which would mean that things wrapped up the way they wrapped up, finished with Mixed Up Files. This is a second book in like a series, so something new is happening now, not just wrapping up what happened before. You can write a new last chapter, so take out chapter 10, use maybe the bones of it, like some of the ideas that started it off, but then write your own ending to Mixed Up Files. I think this is the trickiest one, but I'm interested to see you guys take on the different challenges. So, get started. I kind of walked you through thinking about conflict. It asked you, like, what's the problem in the story? What happens next? How will the characters respond? And how will it end? If you were writing and you found that there are parts where you just kind of read through and it was like, people are just sort of talking and it's just kind of going calm and there's nothing really happening, it's not going to be a very interesting story. You need there to be some sort of an action or some sort of driving motivation for the characters. It cannot just be them sitting around being like, wow, that adventure was fun. It sure was fun. I had a lot of fun. Wasn't that adventure so fun? None of you had that. But what you need to avoid is getting into a place where pieces of your story have that kind of feeling of just sort of, okay, we're here a little bit too long. You don't want to sit in your part of your story a little bit too long. Even the parts of Mixed Up Files where Claudia and Jamie were doing something like hiding, there was still some sort of action. There was still some sort of momentum or interest. They were underneath that thing and they were listening for footsteps and they were talking about what they had to do next. They were making sure that they couldn't be seen. They were keeping an eye out for flashlight beams. There was some action. It wasn't just them sitting there going, because your reader will start to get bored. And what you want is to have an interesting story, not just any story. So I went through, I got to edit your work, I got to see what you guys put in, and I got to give you some feedback on that. I hope my feedback was helpful. I hope it pointed out to you areas where you could add interest or clarify things that didn't make sense. One of those areas could have been dialogue. I encouraged you to make sure that your characters spoke to each other. I will be looking for that in the story to see that they communicate. Does your whole story have to be dialogue? No. There has to be some sort of descriptive action. You can't just have them talking back and forth and back and forth. But it's important that they do that back and forth at some point because it establishes more about who they are as characters. The way that Jamie and Claudia talk to each other, the way that sometimes Claudia can be a little like, oh, well, I know best, and like, this is correct, and Jamie can be like, oh, come on, and get a little snippy with her, shows that they are brother and sister, and they bicker, but they still like each other, and everything kind of plays out in the way they talk to each other. If they were way too formal, or if they were always like perfectly polite to each other, it wouldn't really make sense as a story. It wouldn't feel believable, because they're supposed to be siblings, and siblings don't always get along, even if they mostly get along. So that can be shown in your dialogue, as well as showing emotion by using speaker tags. If you have, stop, she said, why, he said, you can't do this, she said, he said, she said, he said, over and over again. They can be used, but if it's always that, you have the opportunity, when a character is feeling sad or angry or scared, to use a different type of speaker tag to show that without having to tell the audience. Instead of saying, stop, she said, in a scared way, you can just have, stop, she whispered, or stop, she groaned, like holding her side, or whatever. You can show that someone's in pain, or stop, she yelled. You can use their actions and their way of saying something too. If I hiss something at you, sit down, Miss Lombard hissed. That's more of a an urgent or angry sort of way of saying it, instead of just sit down, she said. So you can use that. Not every single one has to be this. If you're going back and forth and it says, stop, she yelled, I won't, he cried, why are you doing this? She whispered. If it's always that, it's going to sound weird. But make sure you use that now and then to help show emotion. All right, perspective. You guys did not have any trouble with this. I am glad to say that everyone kept with either being I, like you were in the story, or being outside of the story and talking about Jamie and Claudia. So good job staying with your narrator type. That can be tricky sometimes, slipping between, but you need to either decide that you know their thoughts or you don't, and make that clear from the beginning and continue it through. All right, last we get to these questions, which are a big help right now because you are looking back through your story. So let's look at these questions. Does the story's beginning name the main characters and introduce the conflict? Does it give details about the setting? If you jump in and it just says, he sat up, you know that it's Jamie because he's the main guy, but not everybody reading it will know that. Even if you're going from one chapter to the next, they usually will use the character's name in the beginning just to establish quickly who that person is. Are there details about where they are? If Jamie and Claudia are back home, make sure that's clear. You don't have to say they are home, but if Claudia turns and says it's really weird being, back in our own beds, that establishes for the reader where they are. So you need some details about the setting. Maybe they're at Miss Frankweiler's. Maybe they're still at the museum. Maybe they're home. But you have to make sure that the reader knows that. Otherwise, they're going to be like, hold on, where's everybody? Number 2, does the story have a clear point of view? This is sort of what I was talking about before. We need to know who's telling it and kind of the direction it's going because of that narration. If Miss Frankweiler is still telling the story, make sure that's clear, that it's coming from the outside and her thoughts and feelings are still being inserted now and then. Number 3, is the plot thickened with complications caused by specific actions and events? This is what I touched on earlier. You don't want it to get boring because nothing's really happening. It doesn't have to be constant action, but there does need to be some sort of movement in the story so that people aren't just sitting around. Otherwise, why write that? It's not very interesting to just keep your characters kind of waiting without some sort of tension. So if they are waiting, make sure they're waiting for something and explain how they're nervous for whatever that is, or they're anxious to find out about whatever it is they're waiting for. If you need help with this, if you are wrapping up and you need some guidance on that, reach out to me. I will help you this week before you have your final thing. I will not do a full story check. Come to me with a specific problem. I've already gone through your whole story. At this point, you can just give me a piece and say, hey, this part right here feels weird to me. What can I do to make this a little bit more interesting? And I can help you. Number 4, does the story use dialogue and set details to create complicated, interesting characters? If your characters come off kind of wooden and boring, that's not very Jamie and Claudia. They're very interesting people. So you need to make sure you're carrying on the way that they interact, the way that they speak, their mannerisms, the things that make them interesting. The dialogue, the way that they talk to each other, and the details about how they move around and the stuff they do should add to that. If you have new characters in there, establish who they are by having these things. The way that they talk, the way that they act or move around and interact with others helps show the reader what they're like. All right, last one. Does the story's end resolve the story's conflict and demonstrate the impact of the events? Now, depending on the type you've chosen. So it says, obviously, first chapter of the sequel, not everything's going to be resolved. Technically, you could have a cliffhanger at the end of the book if you're writing a chapter 11 or rewriting chapter 10. But if it's like a really big cliffhanger where readers would get way too impatient to wait for a second book, if it just like completely drops off, it's not going to really flow well. People would be upset if your favorite book just kind of dropped off with, he opened the door and you'd be like, what happens next? So make sure it kind of wraps up, even if it doesn't share everything, the way that the book actually does. We all know that Mixed Up Files kind of wrapped up most things, but didn't tell you everything, which left some mystery, but not too much of a mystery. If you do think it was too much of a mystery, then make sure your story doesn't have that much of a mystery at the end. The first chapter of the sequel obviously can just cut right off because there's going to be a whole bunch of chapters after it if you were actually writing a whole book. Now, that is me going through the assignment. Quick tie back to the beginning of the video. If you go into Google Docs, sorry, I'm looking down over here because I pulled my computer over with me. And you go up to Tools, up at the bar, hit the button that says Tools. Under Spelling and Grammar, it says Word Count. Click on Word Count. Now, if you go down, there's Characters, which is like every single letter and space and punctuation mark. That's not it. You are looking at words in the story. And so Pages is at the top, and the next one down is Words. That's how many words you have. So if you look and you're like, I'm looking at one right now, and this person is 70 words short. That's important. Everyone should check because it could be you. You don't know whose I'm looking at. That just means they're going to have to add a little bit more in. Maybe they're going to add some more detail to describing the setting at the beginning. Maybe they're going to add a little bit more description to a new character that's coming in or some of the action that's happening in the middle. There's definitely going to be some places where you could add detail without it feeling awkward. You don't always have to jump to the end of a story and be like, all right, well, what can I add on here? I wrapped it up perfectly. There's going to be a place in the middle where you could add some detail in, and you'll be surprised how quickly you can get up to your word count. Okay. So, next thing, after you go back through the story assignment, you should look at the rubric. I am not going to read every single box on here. I am going to look mainly at what you need to do to get an A. Ooh, exceptional work. So, first page of the rubric has all the different things that should be there. Setting. Many vivid descriptive words are used to tell when and where the story took place. Does this sound general? Yeah, because it is a little bit general. I have to read it and see that you've added in that detail. But because I know you as a writer, I'm able to see the effort and the work that you put in. It's not an opinion where I'm like, this is interesting or not. It's just whether or not you put those details there, whether or not you've made this attempt. Characters. The main characters are named and clearly described. Most readers could describe the characters accurately. Do you see how already I've set you up to know how I'm grading it by the way I assigned it? Because I did. Problem and conflict. It's very easy for the reader to understand the problem the main characters face and why it is a problem. If you've thrown in something kind of way out there, if suddenly, I don't know, Jamie turns into a pig, the reader will know what's happening, but they're not going to understand why it's happening or how it fits with the story. So ensuring, and I've already given notes to lots of people on this, ensuring that the conflict that you're introducing works with the story is important. You might in your mind want to go off a whole different direction, but if it's way too far from the existing story, especially if you're doing a chapter 11 or an epilogue, then it's really going to throw off the reader. If we had read Mixed Up Files and then the next chapter was about Jamie turning into a pig, you all would be going crazy. All right, solution resolution. The solution is easy to understand and is logical. There are no loose ends. By easy to understand, I just mean that when you read it, you're not like, wait, what? How did they? Oh, okay, so she just fed him an apple and now he's a human again? If that pig thing came out and then the solution was equally weird, you'd still be confused. Dialogue. There's an appropriate amount of dialogue to bring the characters to life, and it is always clear which character is speaking. So, you guys and I have talked a lot about how when you are writing dialogue, it needs to be on its own new line. It cannot be all in the same paragraph. You have to hit enter and have it on with an indent. Next time there's an indent, you know someone new is speaking. If it's only two characters back and forth, it's a little easier to not put their name every time. And you can do that. But once there's more people added in, you can't just throw in a couple different he's if there's multiple guys talking in the story, so be careful. Organization. The story is very well organized. One idea or scene follows another in a logical sequence with clear transitions. If Jamie and Claudia were at Miss Frankweiler's and then a second later they're at home with no kind of in-between or divider, because sometimes books will have that little like kind of dotted line divider to break up part of the chapter. If that's not there, it's going to be jolting for the reader to be like, oh, and suddenly they're at home. And it's hard to keep reading and stay in that world. Creativity. The story contains many creative details and or descriptions that contribute to the reader's enjoyment. The author has really used his or her imagination. I want you to put yourself into this a little bit too. Use your thoughts, creativity, the things that you wished were part of Mixed Up Files that now you can add in is what's going to make it really interesting. Mechanics. The story contains no errors in grammar, usage, or mechanics. This is me checking to see that you've spelled things right. If you are looking at Google Docs, usually it'll identify for you a word that's misspelled, but if you've misspelled it and it is another real word, then it's not going to catch it for you. You need to be reading through carefully and seeing where those mistakes are. If you've used the wrong type of the word there, or you've misspelled Claudia or Jamie, you got to catch that. Requirements. All the requirements, typed, double-spaced, word count, font margins were met. I didn't give any margin requirements. I didn't give a double-spaced requirement. If you'd like to do that, you can. The word count is the only thing I have for that section. On the back of the rubric is the basics for each of those. So that's where I will kind of be marking out how you did for each of those categories. So I'll go through and I'll mark the points, and I can also put a little bit of a note there. I'm going to put the points earned, and then I'll put like a note about it for each person. And I think what I'll do, since I'm not going to see you right away, will be just, I guess, copy paste that into the bottom of your story so you can see it too. Or make a separate document and send it to you. Now, here's what I recommend as you do this. So I've just read through those. That was kind of your overview. You don't need to go back to those on your own unless you think you need to after what I've just done. But what you should do is look at your story first. Read through it on your own. Yes, you wrote it. Yes, you've seen it before. It's important that you go through it again in its kind of finished form. Just read through it. Then I recommend read it out loud to someone. It's great to have feedback, so reading aloud to a person would probably be good. But it could even be to a pet or a toy, because what you're not looking for necessarily is their reaction. What you're looking for is mistakes. Often when I make things even for class, I find my mistakes when I read it out loud. When I made the Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader game for last week, I read it out loud to MJ and had him take it just to hear it and everything, and I found a couple errors where I had like copied a fact in or like pasted over the same slides page and like made a mistake, put the twice or something. I had already read through it myself, But when I read it out loud to him, I said, what was it? How many sides does a heptagon have? And I was like, ooh, oops, an extra A in there. Get that out of here. I hadn't noticed the first time. I was just reading through quickly because my brain thought it already knew what was on the page. When you're slowing down to read it out loud, you're going to catch those errors. So if you're reading it and you say, Jamie quickly said, what are they doing? He said. As soon as you read that out loud, you're going to go, wait a second. I put the Jamie said tag twice. I only need that in one spot or the other. Whereas when you're just reading in your head, you might have kind of skimmed right over that part. Read it out loud. It will help. You will catch something that's weird. I promise. If you don't, I applaud you. Congratulations. Last thing, make adjustments to smooth it out or clarify. If you do read it out loud and you find a part that's weird, change it. Don't just go, I don't know. It's too late now. It's not too late. Not until Friday afternoon am I going to kind of cut you off and start grading it. And I can see if your edits happen after that due time. I want to look through them. If there's an issue or you can't get it done by that time, email me in advance so I know and I don't start grading it before you've turned it into me. I want you to do well and I want you to have the time that you need. But go back and actually clarify. If you need help, reach out to me or people in your house who you think would help you make sure it makes more sense. If you read it out loud and it just sounds odd and you need to word it differently, switch the wording around. If you read it out loud and part of it's boring, take that part out. You can do that. It's your writing. Just make sure that your word count is still up there. And if it goes down below 1,500, then add some more details in other places. But you don't have to keep in a boring part just because it gets you up to the word count. In fact, your story is just going to be less good. If you are at 14, so if you're at 1,492 words, but your story's really good, I'm probably not going to get cut off that many points. But if you're at like 1,000 words or like 800 words and your story is like meh, I'm going to be like, yeah, you should have added more. This is why you needed more. So be mindful of that. I want you to write a good story, but I want you to be responsible for your story and look through it and make corrections and review it. So these are my suggestions for how to do that. As far as checking structure, some of the things that I put in my notes when I was editing for you guys was about things like dialogue. When you are writing a quotation, something someone says, the quotation marks need to be on the outside of what they say and the outside of the punctuation. So it should be something like, "Don't go in there," she said. And it should be, "Don't go in there, exclamation point, quotation mark," not quotation mark, exclamation point. And then she said. You should have periods at the end of sentences, exclamation points if you need them. Make sure that you're using commas properly, and make sure that you indent at the beginning of paragraphs. It also helps to show when a new section is starting or when a new person is talking, like I mentioned. Watch back through this if you want to see me review either the assignment sheet or the rubric again. And please, please, please email me if you want a little bit of help with a part of your story. Don't just send me the whole thing and say, "Hey, is this right?" If you have a specific question or you need help with a specific thing in the story, you can send it and ask me or mention that specific thing so that I can focus on it with you. That'll be the best way that I can help. Okay? So I love you lots, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye.